And when the Russian Revolution happened in 1917, she, like many progressive people and artists, was very energized by the possibility of a revolutionary transformation of society. However, unlike other well-known Western artists, she contacted the revolutionary government to offer to participate in the building of this new society. And she was probably, as far as I know, the most high-profile celebrity to actually do this. She was at the height of her career, and she chose to associate herself with this project that was very, very controversial. And she didn't just go for a visit. She stayed for 3 years, establishing a school based on education through dance. And just what this period was when she was there, it was really kind of the high point of the revolutionary period. Women were given equal status in society. Abortion and divorce were legalized. There was freedom of religion. There was liberation for people who'd been oppressed by the Tsar. And there was the attempt to bring real democracy into economic production. So it was sort of the height of what people were trying to achieve with that revolution. And very unfortunately, these gains would be reversed under Stalin. And Duncan made her second and last tour of the United States in 1922 during this period, trying to carry the message of revolutionary Russia as well as her art to Americans, which is something that she really wanted to do. She always felt that she was inspired by the sort of the American West and the frontier spirit in the first place, and she wanted to come back and bring it back to America. And unfortunately, she came up against the government that was trying very hard to damp down enthusiasm for the Soviet experiment, which was having a huge impact on the US working class at this time. They detained her at Ellis Island. Some of her shows were canceled. Politicians vilified her. Newspapers editorialized against her, and she was eventually stripped of her US citizenship. She was a dancer. But taking a political stance had a lot of consequences at that moment. And in parting from the US for the last time, and she would leave in 22 and her death was in 27, she never returned, she said, "They may keep my body from entering America, but they cannot keep out my spirit. There are at least 20,000 young girls all over the country, from New York to California, who are now dancing the classic dances that I brought into fashion 20 years ago." And that was right, because actually, although she never received recognition in her lifetime in the United States, it was there that her influence was the most fully felt. And I just want to go on to that period of time, the real era of the development of contemporary dance. And the center for this was New York City. And really, there were two strands of development of contemporary dance at this time. And one of them started really in the late 1920s, and most recognizably associated with Martha Graham, although there are many other dancers, and dancers here know those names, other people know, so I won't mention them. So the one strand, Graham was influenced, as many other artists were at this time, by Freud, the ideas of the subconscious, and she also was very involved with, she had formalistic concerns about how dance would be presented, so very much in the trend of the development of modern art in that period, she was part of that. She did develop a specific technique and had one of the most successful contemporary dance companies, which, does it still exist? Yeah, I think so somehow. Struggling again. Her work and the work of other moderns and content is very personal, sometimes quite mystical. Greek myths were, I think, Graham's favorite source of inspiration. So that was one group of dancers and development, much more in the line of development of modern art in that period. The other group of dancers who also contributed to the development of the aesthetic, the kind of movement in modern dance, and the content, took on Duncan's idea that dance could be part of a revolutionary transformation of society. And these dancers wanted to make socially relevant dances. They identified themselves as revolutionaries, and they wanted to work for a socialist society. This was their goal. Both groups contributed significantly to the aesthetics of contemporary dance and made it a distinctive and recognizable as a form on its own. However, the contribution of the revolutionary dancers has been, I think for the most part, written out of history. Little mentions. I remember when I was doing my dance training, and I have to say I'm very indebted to the work of Ellen Graff, who wrote a book that was published in 1997, which is a specific history of these dancers. It was quite revelatory when I read it to know that this was part of the tradition that came to me as a dancer. The revolutionary dancers were mainly the children of Russian and East European Jews, fleeing pogroms in their countries. They were part of the huge influx of immigrants into the US, and particularly in New York City in the early 1900s. These immigrant communities were part of the vanguard of working class communities that initiated a massive rebellion against the ravages of industrial capitalism during the Great Depression. They lived mostly on the Lower East Side of New York City, and this is also where Graham and the other moderns had their studios because it was the cheapest space. The children of these immigrants were introduced to modern dance at settlement houses, which are kind of like community centers where people could go and they learned English and they had a place to go and instead of just having to be in their tenement homes. Graham taught at these settlement houses, and most of her dancers would come from these places. And some of these students would also become the revolutionary dancers. And the Lower East Side was also a center of political organizing, especially the Communist Party. Their headquarters were there, and at this time they were a very progressive force inside of working class organizing. Working class struggles really reached a high point in the 30s during the Depression. In industrialized America, the working class and the working conditions and living conditions for people was quite horrible. It's hard to remember that time because of the gaze that they made. We don't have to. It's not quite so bad today. People worked long hours. They were barely paid a living wage. They were crowded into tenement apartments living on the Lower East Side, which is the only place they could afford, the option. And during the 30s, there was a massive strike wave, demonstrations for better conditions, and these were the struggles that brought in trade unions to fight for rights in the workplace, publicly funded social security programs, unemployment insurance, pensions, and welfare were all the legacy of those struggles during actually a very difficult period, but that's the gain that we can look at, maybe something for us to think about today. These immigrant dancers wanted to participate in these revolutionary struggles by using dance. Aesthetically, they embraced the social realism of the revolutionary art of their period. Their primary concern for these dancers was to convey a political message. They tackled issues like racism, poverty, and war. And here are the titles of some of their works: Good Morning Revolution, Hunger March, Black and White, and Strike. And in order to say the things that they wanted to say with the form of dance, they really needed to develop a new aesthetic, new ideas about how to move and what kind of energy to use. And so much of their work sort of became the foundation for what we see the hallmarks of contemporary dance today still: strong gestures, bold energy, clean lines, and sort of unadorned bodies. And women in particular were portrayed as warriors and earthy strong figures, so very different from the ballet sylph of the same period. They carried a slogan, "Dance is a weapon in the revolutionary class struggle," similar to slogans that were used in agitprop theater of the day. They had really sort of two goals. The first was to bring revolutionary content to a working class audience by making dances that were about the struggle. And the second was to encourage workers to participate in dance activities as part of the activity of making a better world. So feeling that dance was a way that people could also help empower themselves. In that effort, revolutionary dance was taken very much out of its traditional theater locations and was brought into union halls, into community centers, and on to picket lines. These choreographers were some of the first to also use and incorporate black music into their work. They used jazz and spirituals. And I'm just going to read one newspaper account of the group called the Red Dancers, and a work choreographed by Edith Siegel, and this is from 1922. It's from March 22nd, 1930. It says, Edith Siegel, a white Jewish woman, and Allison Burroughs, a young Negro woman, appeared in black and white worker solidarity dance as part of an interracial Harlem Rebels at Rockland Palace in New York City. After the performance, everyone sang the Internationale, which is the traditional workers' anthem, and then Duke Ellington's band played, and blacks and whites danced together in the latest ballroom styles. So just an example of how dance was used to put forward both a message and also to bring people together in a place that was safe, in a social environment, and a place where blacks and whites could actually mingle legitimately.